till my love took it down. I climbed a mountain and I turned around, and I saw my reflection in snow-covered hills till the landslide brought me down. Oh, mirror in the sky, what is love? Can the child within my heart rise above?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to My Main Stitches. This is Jeannie J. I'm standing here with my first pair of sergered pajamas. This is my favorite seam. This was the seam where I put in the waistband by holding the elastic in place while sewing it to the waistband and the pajamas. That's my favorite seam, but there are a lot of great seams inside, including also an inseam pocket. I just want to show you that. They're so incognito. It's like inseam pockets. I'll tell you all about how I did them, and we'll go step by step through the guide sheet, including the cuffs and everything. But I just want to say here, thanks for watching, and to tell you how pleased I am at how they turned out. I'm not that great at taking pictures, and this is my first real attempt at making a long video on here, so excuse all of my newbie mistakes, meaning my angles aren't quite right. I'm not always as cute as I look right now because I just took pictures of me sewing because I wanted to capture each step and talk to you about how each step is done. So enjoy. Okay, so first thing, I want to celebrate YouTube for having all of these fabulous creators giving us space to share our creations. This is very different from what we used when I was growing up. I only had the guide sheet with some very sparse illustrations on how to do things. But for these pajamas, I looked up steps 1 through 4. Instead of using the guide sheet, I used this lady here. Her name is Sarah Me at Sew So Live. Shout out to them because they do a great job at making what can be a little intimidating, kind of daunting tasks very simple in these step-by-step videos. So the first steps 1 through 4, I used a French seam, inseam pocket. And then for step 5, I started to do the cuffs. But I put the link below and I hope you enjoy it. For the cuff steps, I came down to step number 5 on the guide sheet and decided to do the cuffs in completion before moving on to step 6, the inner leg seams. I did this because when these guide sheets give instructions to go ahead and complete the pajamas and then basically do the cuffs at the very end, where the cuffs are already sewn into a complete circle and the pant legs are a complete circle. When you put those two complete circles together, inevitably for me, there's always a little bit of something that's off one way or the other. So this time I decided to try something different. I went ahead and turned down the seam allowance for the cuffs and then folded the cuffs in half, and I pressed those things in place. And then later or next, I sewed the piping onto the front of the cuff, right sides together, and then I just placed that over the bottom of the pants and the seam allowance, leaving the ends open so that I could come back and adjust that after I completed the seam. Okay. So here goes. I know once I start, I won't be able to say anything because this is like a sewing machine on steroids and it's loud. but this is my first time serging an actual seam for my pajama pants first on the serger. And so I'll go back over to the machine and just finish off that stitch. But this is actually inside of a cuff, so it's gonna actually fold in something like that. But for now, that's my first seam on the serger. Okay, so what I've done is I've trimmed off a little bit of extra that was on the end of our cuff here, and I went ahead and folded that seam allowance down, and I just laid the other side, the short side, in underneath this one in the same direction as that seam allowance, all going backwards, see? And then I placed that inside of the longer fold and just put everything down neatly. And what I'm going to do now is come back in with my regular sewing machine and first reinforce the end of the serger seam and then reinforce the whole cuff. I'll probably do a T. I'll do this seam. This really isn't a reinforcement. This is just finishing off this seam and simultaneously putting an ending, tying off the loose ends of the serger stitch. And then I'll come back and do a T, and then this is actually reinforcing this cuff seam where I put the piping onto the bottom of the pant leg. So that's what's up next, and that's how I finished off both of the cuffs. Next, I'll do the waistband. Okay, just before we do the waistband, we want to go ahead and turn one pant leg inside out and place it inside of the other pant leg. We'll sew together both pant legs at creating a crotch seam by sewing those together with right sides together. The important thing to remember here is to pin down and make sure you're keeping your seam allowances going the right way, but to pin liberally. We want to get this this crotch seam done nice and well before we move on to the final steps of the waistband. For steps 9 through 11, moving right along here. I did not include the false drawstring. I am just not into fake pockets or fake drawstrings. So for these steps, I did modify the pattern guide sheet instructions just a bit. I went ahead and sewed, as you can see here, the sides of the waistband together and then folded that in half and then measured the elastic around my waist and sewed that together on its ends before putting that inside of that waistband piece and taking that waistband piece and sewing those all together onto the top of the pajamas using the serger. Now, that means that I skipped all the way down really to the final steps of the pattern for me because I had already done the cuffs previously and I didn't do the drawstrings. The next and final steps were simply to complete the waistband which I did on the serger, and I will include an awesome link here for how to serge your waistband. But all in all, it turned out pretty great. I just want to note that it took quite a bit of concentration to get this waistband sergered onto these pajamas. There you see me pinning the pocket back, but what I learned is that in addition to pinning the pocket back, I really need to watch that those pockets go through laying down flat so that the seams and seam allowances and such are all going the direction that I want them to go, because on the serger there it is unforgiving in terms of how hard the pressure foot presses things down, and you really don't want it to be too light, especially not for lighter fabric. But I have to say, all the adjustments turned out great, including the wedge adjustments for the butt. Good times. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me for the next video.